Since allegations of rape and sexual assault against Mohammed Al-Fayed first emerged last month, hundreds of women have come forward to give their own accounts of their treatment at the hands of the former owner of Harrods. One of them is Bianca Gascoigne, the daughter of former England footballer Paul Gascoigne. She worked at the department store as a teenager, and she told me that she quickly caught the attention of the billionaire, who groomed her and sexually assaulted her repeatedly. Bianca says embarrassment and shame has prevented her from speaking out sooner. But she has waived her right to anonymity to break her silence in the hope that she can help other women who are in the same situation. I began by asking Bianca how she came to work so closely with Al-Fayed. And just to warn you that the interview does contain descriptions of sexual assault.
It was just on the shop floor. You know, he started asking me questions. I did say, oh, I've met you many times before when I was like a little bit younger. And he was just telling me what a good job I was doing, very supportive. And then shortly after that, it would lead to the reports of how well the boutique was doing. And that's kind of when the grooming stages started quite early. He used to tell me how much of a bad father my dad was, because he used to come into the store drunk, and he used to tell me that he was an embarrassment, that I should look to him as a father figure, that he could rely on me. And yeah, I felt a false sense of security with him early doors, because I used to go into the store with my mum and dad, and he used to come over, be very charming, you know, bring us gifts, very personable. So I literally felt quite safe in his presence early doors.
When you worked there, he was aware of who your mum and dad were?
Absolutely, yes.
When did things take a turn? When was the first inkling you got that something wasn't right?
I worked my way up to become a fashion buyer, and I had to go and report to him. So I just would generally have chit-chats with him. And, you know, very, very shortly after this is when this would happen. He would also put money in my bag where I used to go up there, and he used to tell me that I was very, you know, because I didn't want to take it, obviously, you're just put it on the spot, and I was like, no, it's fine, like, you know, and he would tell me that I was very disrespectful and rude if I wouldn't take it. So in the end, you just think, OK, fine, like, I'll just take it.
Anything to get out of there?
Yeah, absolutely. And shortly after the money, then it would be, you know, I'll buy the kiss on the cheek would then lead to on the mouth, and he would try and put his tongue in my mouth, and it, you know, a couple of times that actually happened, which just makes me feel absolutely disgusting now. And then it would be touching and groping, etc. And I would feel like he would manoeuvre his way to the door, so I'd feel a bit trapped and I couldn't actually get out. And it just put me in such an awful situation at such a young age. And when I look back at it now, I just feel very sorry for my 16-year-old self. That was 22 years ago now, and it's something that I've really tried to put, you know, like just forget about, because that's how I deal with things. I put it in a box and put it to the side, and, you know, so obviously talking about it today is obviously bringing up quite a lot of the emotions that I felt at the time and the shame. And then as I was a fashion buyer, I was travelling the world to go and buy clothes for the store. I told him that I was going to Milan to go and buy clothes. He was like, oh, go and stay at the apartment. I was like, oh, that's great, because obviously I've got to get up early and get a flight. And then
this was the apartment on Park Lane, which has been mentioned by so many women who have similar stories to yours. But you just thought, this is an apartment owned by Harrods, so people use it for work purposes.
Absolutely. So I was obviously getting an early flight. He turned up at the apartment, to my shock. I just couldn't believe it. I was just gobsmacked. I was kind of very shell-shocked that I just didn't really know what to do, apart from, you know, he came in and then he sat me down on the sofa and, like, was obviously very forceful with, you know, the touching and the kissing, and he got his private out and got my hand and was trying to manoeuvre it on, you know, his parts, and when that didn't work, he was trying to force my head onto his lap, and I don't know how, but I managed to wiggle away. And I think possibly, you know that him knowing my parents, where I was working to someone so closely to him, maybe, I don't know, that might have saved me at that moment, but it was horrific.
You're 16, 17. How are you feeling? You're in this big, fancy apartment on your own, presumably at night, and your boss walks through the door and that happens. Like, just talk me through what's going on in your head.
Thinking about it now, it just seems like such a horror story. Like, it's giving me the shakes because it just put me in this horrible position. Obviously, I loved my job because that's exactly what I wanted to, to do. That was my dream. And, he's doing all these things to me, and I was close to people that he knew, and I felt like I couldn't even tell them either because I didn't want to bring embarrassment and shame. I haven't actually, I'm going to probably get emotional because I'm talking about my mum, but I haven't even told my mum exactly what went down. So, yeah, it's quite tough. It's hard to talk to her because she's so close to me. Obviously, sitting here talking to you, it makes it a little bit different. It makes it, like, if I speak to my mum, it makes it a bit more real.
But your mum had a bit of mother's intuition that things weren't right. Mm-hmm. And she actually went to see Mohammed Al-Fayed.
Yeah, because I told her that he was offering to buy me an apartment, and she was just like, obviously red flags were going off, and she went to actually speak to him and was just like, what's going on here? And I think someone actually in Harrods said to her, don't let her accept the apartment. And obviously, she didn't know this was going on. I hid it from her. I didn't want to upset her. I was so ashamed and embarrassed and just mortified with what was going on. I was just trying to pretend it wasn't really happening to me, if I'm honest.
Did you confide in anyone at that time? Because, as you said, you worked with somebody extremely close to Mohammed Al-Fayed, so you couldn't talk to them. But you did work with others at Harrods. Did you get a sense that you might not have been the only one?
Honestly, I don't think I'd thought that at the time. I was trying to deal with what I was dealing with, what was going on, because it was just so horrific. And I just didn't want to lose my job at that point. And he told me if I would say anything that I would lose my job. So I just really, got scared. And at 16, turning 17, I just, you think you know what's going on at the time, but you really don't. Like, I look back now and just feel very sorry for my 16-year-old self and wish I could protect her.
And at such a young age as well, and you touched on it before, he thought you were vulnerable because of your parents having separated, not being together anymore. The perception of your father in the tabloids at the time, he saw you now think as somebody vulnerable, somebody that he could target, and that is something we hear a lot about when it comes to grooming and sexual assault of young girls. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
Becoming a mum, I just thought I need to speak out because I do not want my daughter to grow up in a world where women are silenced and feel that they don't have a voice when we do, and things shouldn't be happening. And I just hope me coming out and speaking will give other women the voice as well, so that it doesn't make these predators think that they can get away with it, because it is spoken about now and it will be spoken about, and hopefully if that just puts the seed of thought into these predators' minds that they might get caught out and they're going to get spoken about. They're not going to proceed to do these horrible crimes, basically.
And did you take courage from the other women that have come forward? Have you been following this for the last few weeks?
I have.
Months?
It's something, like I said, I put to bed many moons ago, 22 years ago. And obviously hearing their stories, I thought, no, I was just so proud of them. And I thought, no, this is exactly what I should be doing.
Was the worst of it what happened at that apartment? What happened after that incident? Because, as you said, you then got on a plane, shaken, upset, not quite sure of what was going on. Off to Milan, you go to do your job, and you come back. What happens then?
I think I drank a lot at that point because I was trying to silence my brain and my mind, and I just kind of reached to alcohol as a survival mode at that point, which really upsets me now because I had a very unhealthy relationship with alcohol throughout my life, and I do think that maybe that could have stemmed it.
Is that when it started, do you think, around that time?
Yeah, because I was just numbing what was going on. Because, like I said, I was in my dream job. I was getting sexually assaulted, by my boss, which I felt very scared to even be able to come out and talk about, very embarrassed, ashamed, dirty. I just wanted it to go away. So the alcohol was like numbing that in my mind. And I feel like, because I obviously trusted him at the start, because he knew my parents, I've dealt with him, I've crossed paths with him before, my trust in people obviously went, you know, skyrocketing to the floor, which I already found it hard to trust people anyway, growing up, you know, in the limelight. So that was even like that was a big lesson that I learned.
How consistent was this abuse? How regular was it that you were put in harm's way?
It was very regular because I had to take reports up to his pretty every week, kind of. So it was just obviously slowly but quickly ended up, you know.
And it would always
enhancing.
happen?
Always, yes. If it was something, whether it was a grope, whether it was, you know, the hug that lent into him trying to put his tongue down my throat all the time. And it's just, it's mad now because I'd be like, if it happened to me now, I'd like to think that I'd be like, give him a punch or something like that. But when I was just so scared and so didn't really know what was going on.
You're a child.
And, you know, he's a very powerful man. You know, I was 16, I'm going into his store. I managed to work my way up to have the dream job. I'm scared about losing it, and he's just putting me in these positions. It was just, I just felt so dirty after coming out of the office. It was just horrible.
Part of you must have thought you'd be safe because of who your parents were, and I think that's what people may find shocking about this interview, is that your mum and dad were really famous, and Mohammed Al-Fayed felt emboldened enough, because we understand that this was happening to other women, probably at the same time you were there.
Many women.
That, you know, you weren't protected. There was no protection for you because of your parents' celebrity status. You were as much a target as everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of, I suppose, if people watch it, they can think, if it's happened to me, how many other women that haven't come forward? So hopefully me doing this can, you know, give the strength to any other women that have been through the same thing.
Yeah. What does justice look like to you? Because he is dead. And having spoken to women that were abused by him, it's very hard to know what justice looks like, but they feel like you, they have to tell their story to embolden other women to share the experience, for people to know what he was really like. So what does justice look like for you, Bianca?
So, well, like you said, he's not around, but you want him to be made accountable for the things that he's done. I just, you know, want the women to find peace in what's happened and just come together to know that you're not alone, that this happens to many women. And I just want women to have their own voice and just come out and just be able to talk their own truth. And if it's something that, you know, I know this has affected a lot of people in many ways. So just for women that have been through it to heal, basically, because the justice isn't really going to be justice, because, like, you know, he can't be made accountable for it because he's not here.
And finally, Bianca, this is the first time you've spoken about this. Thank you for trusting us with your story. And I know that when you leave this room, you're now going to have those difficult conversations with your mum and your dad, your granddad, your brothers. What's going through your head right now? Because that is not going to be easy. This, you and I, you know, is the easy bit almost. Yeah,
it makes it very much real, being able to, you know, speak to my mum about it. I'm sure I'm going to cry again. There's going to be a lot of tears because it was just so horrible. So it's just, I feel ashamed, obviously, telling like my granddad and my brothers, because obviously it's just hard. It just,
don't be ashamed. It's not a shame, Bianca. It's not a shame.
I just don't want to upset them. But like, obviously, coming here and speaking to you is, I feel like I have to do this. Like, and I want to do this, and I want to stand for the women, and, you know, and just hopefully make any kind of change that in the future that my daughter wouldn't have to go through something like this, and it would be spoken about, and these predators wouldn't be able to get away with what they're getting away with, you know, in the past.
Well, a huge thank you to Bianca Gascoigne for trusting us to tell her story, speaking for the very first time. We have spoken to Bianca today, and she started to have those difficult conversations with her family, but she is feeling good about speaking publicly and hopefully empowering other women to come forward. She feels it's a weight off of her shoulders. And as I said to her then, that shame is not hers to carry. Let's bring in our correspondent, Sarah Chowdhury, who is outside Harrods for us this evening. Because since that BBC documentary aired around 4 weeks or so ago now, Saba, many women have come forward. We're in the hundreds now. What have Harrods been saying today following Bianca, the most high-profile woman to come out? This woman's got a platform to speak about what happened to her. What have they said in response to what Bianca Gascoigne has said tonight?
Good evening, SJ. Firstly, I just want to say that was a really brave account there by Bianca Gascoigne, especially considering she hadn't told anyone about what happened to her, let alone her parents. And we now know that, hers is one story. There are many others that we have heard the past few weeks, hundreds, in fact. Harrods themselves have said that since the BBC Panorama programme that came out about a month ago, featuring about 5 women, there are now over 250 individuals that are settling claims with Harrods. And I think it is important to stress that, and this is from the Justice for Harrods Survivors Group, that for these women, it's not just about the money, or it's not about the money at all. For them, it is about getting justice. And now that Fayed has died, he passed away last year, more women, they say, are feeling safe about coming forwards.
Yes, Saba, the fear may have gone because Mohammed Fayed is dead, but, the shame, as Bianca said, for so women remains. And we're getting an idea of how big a scale we're looking at here. Just how big is this case right now, and what's the look ahead to the future of this? Because more women will come forward.
Absolutely, and more women are coming forwards. We know, according to Scotland Yard, they said last week that a detailed and thorough review is currently underway, looking into the allegations made by hundreds of women alleging sexual abuse from the former Harrods boss. For example, police, we know, were shown evidence by the Crown Prosecution. Police rather showed evidence to the Crown Prosecution Service in 2009 and 2015. But the CPS decided not to go ahead with it. And this was because they said that there was not a realistic prospect of conviction. And that while Fayed was alive, the Met had asked prosecutors only to look into 2 out of 21 of the cases that they had brought forward. So really raising some serious questions about the Met's response to alleged victims, the number of whom, SJ, we may never truly know.
Saba, thank you. Saba Chowdhury, outside Harrods for us in central London this evening. Well, a lawyer representing some of Fayed's victims says this case could be worse than Jimmy Savile. But the truth is, as Saba said, we will never know the true scale of his abuse. 5 in 6 women who are raped don't report it. They're too embarrassed. And they're worried that the process of seeking justice is too humiliating. Every year, 1 in every 30 women is raped or sexually assaulted, which means you probably know someone who has become a survivor in the last 12 months. You're probably thinking, no, I don't, but perhaps they haven't told you. Now you need to ask yourself why. How do we stop this happening again if women don't have the confidence to talk? I'm not necessarily talking about going to your boss or the police, but to their best mate, their mum or dad. Why is it victims are carrying the shame? That shame is not theirs. It belongs to the men who do this to them. And it's only by empowering women to find their voice that change can happen. As Bianca said, we owe it to our daughters. So thank you to Bianca and to all the women who have come forward so far. Still to come here on the UK Tonight. The Crown Prosecution Service released details of Chris Kaba's suspected gang-related violent past, just days before he was shot by police. Plus, the public anger as 1,000 more prisoners are released early. Will this scheme really help protect the prison service? And the calls to grant pie and mash protected food status. And don't forget the parsley liquor.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours, and we are going to take it back.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power. Now, freedom! There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes, torrential rain and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued with its ultimatum to the people of Ashkelon, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in. Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
It's been revealed today that Chris Kaba, who was shot dead by a police officer 2 years ago, was a key member of one of London's most dangerous gangs and was wanted over a shooting that happened days before he was killed. Details of his criminal background have been released after armed police officer Martin Blake was cleared of murdering the 24-year-old yesterday. Our crime correspondent Martin Brunt has this report.
Minutes before the shooting, on their way into the nightclub, the red arrow shows the victim. The blue arrow is the alleged gunman Chris Kaba. It was the week before Kaba's death. In the packed bar, Kaba pushes his way through the crowds towards the victim. He opens fire. The victim, hit in the leg, manages to run. Chris Kaba calmly puts the gun in his bag and, in the chaos, strides out. Only then does he start to run, chasing the victim and shooting him a second time. In the wake of the shooting, the nightclub was closed down.
If he'd lived, Chris Kaba would have been charged with attempted murder for the shooting here. And police were also planning to put a gang injunction on him to restrict his activities as someone involved in gang violence.
Oh, police!
Chris Kaba was shot dead by a police marksman 6 days later.
Standing by for strike, stand by, stand by.
He was driving a vehicle linked to a shooting the night before. The firearms officer, Martin Blake, was cleared of murder. His acquittal prompted much criticism of the decision to charge the officer, not least from a colleague of his who was there on the night.
Martin was acting entirely in good faith in order to protect his colleagues and in doing so more broadly to protect members of the public. So I think for many firearms officers it's a confusing situation they find themselves in, that it's actually the public who will suffer from this. The public are less safe when we create a culture where our police officers are neither valued nor treated fairly. And I think for all of us within the policing community particularly, but for those members of the public who have an interest in this too, I think we should all be very concerned.
And in a statement, the Met Police Federation criticised the police watchdog, the IOPC. It remains a matter of grave concern, said the Federation, that investigations into the most serious, complex and dynamic operational scenarios such as this are carried out by those who seemingly have little or no experience of policing.
Show me your hands!
The Met Commissioner has called for more legal protection for officers who use lethal force. Not everyone agrees.
I'm not in favour of there being a different justice system for the police. It's been suggested today by some people that we should have a sort of court-martial system. Our police officers are not soldiers. They're citizens in uniform, as we've always believed. They're subject to the same law as us, and I think that should be the situation. Otherwise, I think there's a real risk if there was a special system of justice for police officers who'd shot people. That would strongly weaken, very much weaken public confidence.
Details of Chris Kaba's past had been kept from the jury, but revealed the day after the verdict.
Little bro, F-side's back, I just want to pick up a knife and ching.
This was Kaba, his rap name Mad Itch, said to be a core member of the 6-7 gang in South London and allegedly its principal gunman. His family had hoped to keep details of his gang connections hidden until a potential inquest. They did not respond to the revelations. Martin Brunt, Sky News.
Oh, well, let's get more on this story now. I'm joined by Anthony King, Director at Majestic Care Services, which works with children impacted by serious youth violence. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us on the programme. This information about Chris Kaba's background released into the public domain today. How are you feeling this affects the story, the narrative about Chris Kaba?
You know, first things first, I'm really heartbroken for the family who received the not guilty verdict yesterday. They're still trying to process the news that was received. They expected a guilty verdict, understandably, and the verdict has gone a different way. The revelations that have come out after are deeply concerning. On top of the fact that they got a not guilty verdict, they've now been told some information that they may not have been privy to, and I'm confident that they weren't privy to prior to yesterday's, prior to the trial. So this is it's a tough pill to take as a community. It's a tough pill to swallow for the family at this time.
What does it do to how the community is affected? Does it bring some more understanding as to why the police officer reacted the way he did on that evening? Because from what we now know, the car was known in connection to a shooting. Chris Kaba, the driver, was known in connection to a shooting. You know, he was a person of interest, a suspect. These were allegations. He wasn't convicted of any crime. He was still an innocent man at that point. But this is the kind of information we know that those firearms officers were privy to on that night when they approached that car, a car that was trying to ram itself out of a position. They knew that there was a real prospect that there was a gun inside that car. Does that bring a better understanding, do you think, to the community of what went on that night?
We have an expectation that the police will police this community as best as they can and as safe as they can. I'm confident that the Met, I don't genuinely believe that the officer woke up that morning with the intention of killing. But what I do recognise from what has been shared, the information that's been shared, is that the officers didn't know who was driving the vehicle. They knew about the car. There was understanding about the car being involved in an incident. But I'm not confident, and I haven't heard clarity that they were aware of the colour of the man that was in the vehicle and that it was Chris himself. But with the news that has come out after the hearing, personally, I'm still mindful of the fact that he's got a child that's gonna in one day the child's gonna Google the name of her father and realise all of this narrative is out of her father. That's a major concern for me. But yes, the information that's come out since the hearing is deeply concerning. But we still have to take into account that we've lost a life, a black young man on the streets of London.
And you make a good point there. You know, these are allegations and information that Chris Kaba isn't here to answer to.
No.
He has not afforded that opportunity. There is now a question about firearms officers and the Met Police and it being less safe for people, because if police firearms officers are hesitant about doing their job because they are fearful of the repercussions, then the community itself is not protected. In effect, firearms officers become less effective. What do you think of that narrative in terms of how firearms officers are perceived now after this case?
I don't think the discussion amongst the community is about the firearms officers. With over 70 years of transgenerational and intergenerational trauma, of where you've got situations like Mark Duggan, Don Charles de Mendes, we've got, it's like trauma has been brought back to the fore because of this matter with Chris Kaba. We need the police to police our streets. We need the firearms unit to be the firearms unit. We need safety, we genuinely do. But what you need to take into account is that we're dealing with matters of trauma. Even seeing the video footage that was released yesterday of the moment that the officer dispatched the gun, shot Chris Kaba, that raised some serious traumas for the black community, and we need to take that into account. There are questions that need to be answered. We need to answer questions. We need the IOPC to come forward. What is the threshold of murder? What is the threshold of manslaughter? There's questions that the community are texting me, asking me to ask. What meets the threshold? What is it that it will take to get a conviction? This isn't the first black man that has been murdered. I'll use the term murder because that's how the community feel. It's not the first black man that has been, that has died at the hands of the police. But what is the learning from it? Now, I'm confident that trust and confidence can be built, but there's going to have to be some tough discussions moving forward. I'm also confident that Sir Mark Rowley is doing a great job in weeding out racism from the Met, misogyny, homophobia. He's actually doing a brilliant job, and we've got to be patient and work with him to see the change. I do not blame the fire. We need the firearms unit, if I'm honest with you. But my thing is, we're still grieving the fact that a young man's life has been taken, and as you rightfully said, at that point was innocent until proven guilty. A young man's life hasn't got a father tonight.
Anthony King, really good to have you on the programme tonight. Thank you so much for your thoughts on the new information that's been put into the public domain today about the background of Chris Kaba, the man who died in that incident with a firearms officer. That's Anthony King, their Director of Majestic Care Services, community activist. Anthony King, thank you. Still to come here on the programme, we see firsthand the issues inside the prison service. On the day, more than 1,000 inmates were given early release. Prime Minister has promised today's early release of more than 1,000 prisoners would be the last under the current government scheme, even as one inmate cheered "Big up Keir Starmer" as he walked out of jail today. Downing Street have insisted Sir Keir shares the public's anger over prisoners ending their sentences early, but maintained that this scheme was necessary to stop the prison system from collapsing completely. Sky's Molly Malone has been speaking to some of those released early. Well, we don't have that. We're just going to look for that. And Molly Malone is going to join me in the studio shortly. She has had exclusive access inside a prison in Kent, which shows the pressure that the prison system is under. But I think we've just found the people that she was speaking to. Is this... we have got it. Let's bring you Sky's Molly Malone's report. Here it is.
HMP Ford in Sussex, releasing inmates early in order to free up space across an overcrowded prison estate. This man was one of 1,100 freed today. He was serving time for drug offences and is determined not to go back.
What's the mood inside jail?
Well, it's a positive mood, yeah. Everyone's going home, so everyone's happy.
Are you confident you're going to stay out?
I'm 100% staying out.
He'd been released after serving 40% of his sentence.
It should be 20%. I think people should be in prison for less time, a lot less time.
Why do you think that?
Because they want to go home.
The people freed early today were sentenced to more than 5 years, longer jail terms than those released last month.
Do you think it's right that people are being let out early?
Well, if it helps the situation, then yeah.
The government think it will help the situation. We filmed inside HMP Elmley in Kent, a prison that's been operating at almost 100% capacity.
Just so busy.
And even though we were escorted by experienced staff, you could feel the tension.
So a prisoner there was just presenting himself with scars on his body, and he said this is what prison does, self-harm.
Tight conditions here are having an impact. All of it fueling friction. And for staff, they're feeling it.
What's a bad day like? Could be anything. Could be fighting a fire, could be giving CPR, could be stopping a giant fight, a near-on riot, could be anything. Some days you come in and you've got all of that in one day, some days you've got none of it.
That might not be surprising to the government or the opposition, but still, hearing from staff inside, a reminder for those on the outside about how much pressure our prisons are under.
We saw a very powerful package on Sky News this morning highlighting this.
And so the government are releasing people to ease overcrowding, but a commitment too to reviewing sentencing policy.
This government believes in prison, but we must also increase the use of punishment outside of prison too.
A move welcomed by this governor.
I would love to see no custodial sentences under 12 months. I think if you could have the resource in the community to really deliver powerful community sentences, that has the power to really support true change in a way that is a lot cheaper for taxpayers.
The time we spent in prison was just a snapshot. Not the worst day they'd seen, but not without incident either. All of it reflective of a prison system that's spent months in crisis. And they're not out of it yet. Molly Malone, Sky News.
Well, Molly is here with me in the studio. And Molly, it's worth pointing out what rare access that is to go inside a prison, inside the cells, see the prisoners going about their day-to-day routine, hear from them as well, hear from the guards. That is very rare. What was it like to be in there?
I think the main thing that struck me actually was the sensory overload. It was just noisy the entire time, and people might expect that, and I expected that to some extent, but then you go in and there's just crashing, there's banging. Even when the prisoners were locked up, and it was by all accounts much quieter, one cell was blaring techno music out of their cell, and just having that noise all day in itself, for me, I came out tired because I was tired from the noise. So that was one thing that kind of struck me. But quite quickly, and I should say, this isn't one of the worst prisons. There are a lot of
prisons out there that are operating at 130, 140% capacity. This was kind of operating the last 6 months or so at about 96%. So very few spaces left, but still feeling the pressure of the overcrowding crisis. But by 8 o'clock in the morning, we were in a briefing with the Governor. The Governor was talking to us and explaining that prison is an unpredictable place. In that moment, an alarm went off. A staff member had been assaulted. And to the prison service, that happens every day. That's quite normal. But to us, it quite quickly gave us a sense of what they're up against and the kind of pressures that they're facing. An hour later, we were walking from one wing to the other, and a prisoner lifted up his top and presented scars across his body and said, "This is what prison does to you, self-harm." Again, self-harm across the male estate has risen by 25%. It's not uncommon, but that was within an hour of one another, 2 incidents. And this is a typical day inside prison, but in that sense, it was more insightful because actually it felt quite typical. It felt quite normal. Now, what we saw today was the early release of 1,100 prisoners. This is, the government says, happening because of those conditions, because of what we're seeing inside prisons, because of how difficult they're finding it to operate at the moment. And let's be honest, this has been happening for the best part of 18 months to 2 years now. They've been battling this overcrowding crisis for. The government said that this early release is the second and final release. They don't want to keep doing this. They say that it's a temporary measure. They're looking ahead to the sentencing review, which is taking a look at, does prison work or does it not? Or is there some kind of balancing act between prison working for some people, but actually community sentences? We know that their prisons minister, James Timpson, thinks that a third of people in prison shouldn't be there, and actually we should spend time rehabilitating people, toughening up perhaps community sentences. So there's lots going on. It will be a balancing act, but certainly even if the government are saying that this early release is the final release that they want to do, it's an 18-month trial, but this was this final kind of mass release of people. I don't think the story's over yet, and there's a long way to go.
Yeah, very much so. As you said, it's a deep-rooted problem, and the solutions are long-term. There are no quick fixes here. I mean, this early release scheme is seen as a quick fix, but the governor said, you know, we can't do that because the public are not happy with it. And you spoke to prisoners about the early release scheme, and you spoke to those that work within the prison as well. What is their view of it? Because, again, it feeds into the public's dissatisfaction with this even being an option. You can only imagine what the victims are going through. For prisoners to be coming out going, big up Keir Starmer, thanks for the early release, I'm off, you know, down the pub or being picked up in sports cars. It's abhorrent for victims of crime.
Yeah, let's remember, for so many of these early releases, there will be victims. We've heard from them, a couple of them in the last few days, who really feel that there are loopholes in the legislation. The government have put in place exclusions for domestic abuse offences, but it's based on the offence, not the offender, which means that they can't take into account their potential risk of harm. If someone goes to prison for, say, assault or ABH or GBH, but that was in a domestic setting, they can't take account for that. So they can take account of things like coercive control or stalking because they're specific domestic abuse offences. So there are lots of loopholes. The government accept that. They say there is no risk-free option. They say constantly that they inherited this crisis, but there will be lots of people that feel very upset about it. Another massive issue is this idea of recalls. I spoke to one prisoner inside that prison in Kent, and he said it's a revolving door. You constantly see people released homeless with no accommodation, and then they feel that they're drawn into reoffending, they're breaking
because they want to go back in.
He actually said to me, people want a roof over their heads, so they commit further offences to come back in. And to some extent, we know this is happening, but to hear them say they're seeing it every day was quite something.
OK, all right, Molly, thank you. Molly Malone there with very rare access inside a prison in Kent. And as she said, that story will run and run. Coming up on the programme, Protect Our Pies calls for the East End delicacy to be given special status. We'll be discussing that. And in the sport, Champions League updates on the way for you. Arsenal and Aston Villa both in action tonight.
And now it's coming from both sides and it's moving this way.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat
furiously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
This is going to be the biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
That's it got us then. There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits coming in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news. Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at her arms, I can put my entire hand round. This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Mother Nature can be vicious, absolutely savage. The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa! Close and personal with a rhino. This is what makes the job so fantastic.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Still to come, is it time we granted protected status to a good old-fashioned plate of pie and mash? I can hear my dad and my husband at home saying, oh, yes, we should. But first, Ted, is here on the sport. Have you got a view on pie and mash?
I enjoy pie and mash, yeah. I won't keep you too long. I know it's an important story to get to,
yeah.
so...
Let's run through the old Champions League before we get onto food.
Yeah, I guess an old meat pie and mash. Well, it's a sport. It's a sport kind of staple, isn't it?
Yeah, pie and a bovril at the football. Maybe that should be protected as well. But we'll talk about pie and mash. Let's get to the Champions League first.
OK.
Because quite a few teams in action tonight. What's going on?
Well, we've got Arsenal in action, looking to bounce back from their defeat to Bournemouth at the weekend. A bit of a stuttering first half, but they do lead 1-0 against the Ukrainian side, Shakhtar Donetsk. That's a goal, it's an own goal from Riznek, coming off Gabriel Martinelli's shot, came off the post and then off the Shakhtar goalkeeper, back then into the goal. Meanwhile, Aston Villa looking to stay 100% in the Champions League. They're currently scoreless at home to Italian side Bologna, who are playing in this competition for the first time in 60 years. The big story there, John Duran playing up front, Ollie Watkins on the bench. And an interesting story regarding Jude Bellingham, Sarah-Jane, in that he's up against his old club, Borussia Dortmund, a repeat of the Champions League final. A bit of criticism of Jude Bellingham had that wonderful season last year at Real Madrid. Yet to score. He'd had 10 by this stage last season. He's come close on a couple of occasions, hit the frame of the goal, had a head denied. But Real Madrid are trailing at home 2-0 to Borussia Dortmund. One of their goals scored by 20-year-old Englishman Jamie Gittins from Reading. So it's a big story potentially in the offing there, because Spanish media have been quite critical of young Bellingham.
Yeah, and it's worth reminding people what stage of the Champions League we're at and in terms of what's at stake for the teams playing tonight.
Yeah, so this is the Champions League new format, group stage. There's 8 games, so we think around 10 points will at least guarantee you a playoff spot to get into the knockout stage. So all far from lost for Aston Villa. 100% before tonight, looking at 7 points. They'll be very close to getting there. But for Real Madrid, I suppose, the champions, of course, most successful team ever in this competition, they'll be a little bit concerned. Lost last time out in the Champions League, to be trailing 2-0. A lot of question marks about whether they can have Kylian Mbappe, who's arguably the world's best player, brought him in, but whether he fits in with all the stars like Bellingham and Vinicius Junior. So they'd be mathematically up against it. But you would assume that Real Madrid, with another 5 games to come, will get enough points. So that's the situation in the Champions League. Up next, we've got news of a punishment for the Nottingham Forest owner.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
The first real footballing memory was Arsenal winning the double and my dad taking us to Highbury Corner to go and watch us do the parade. I can almost still feel myself like as a small child and my dad's hand being like in front of my eye and like just trying to hold on to my dad's hand so that we can walk through.
Yeah.
And it's so weird that it does that. Do you know what I mean? And but it's an amazing thing. My first shirt was the Arsenal goalkeeping shirt in '98, and I had Alex Manninger on the back.
Why Alex Manninger?
I don't know. I was always a fan of like the rogue player. For some reason, I always used to wear that. Then it was a Overmars 11 shirt, JVC, yellow away top, the yellow one. Yeah, so that home and away kit in 1998 was my first kits. Ronaldo. El Fenomeno Ronaldo, not Cristiano.
The one that you've got a tattoo of.
The one that I've got a tattoo of. Yeah, I think I love Thierry. Love Thierry.
Yeah, I was surprised you didn't pick an Arsenal player.
Yeah.
But
if I was to look at the first time I saw football and went...
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Now, what have Elton John, David Beckham and Danny Dyer all got in common? Well, they all enjoy a good old-fashioned plate of pie and mash. Now, there are calls to legally protect the traditional East End delicacy. Tory MP Richard Holden says the meal of minced beef pie, mashed potato and, of course, parsley liquor is the original fast food. And he's now calling on the government to provide the dish with official traditional speciality guaranteed status. It's afforded to the likes of the Cornish pasty and the Melton Mowbray pork pie, of course. Now, at one time or another, Sir Elton, David and Danny have all settled in for a feast at arguably the most famous pie and mash shop in the world, Manze's in Bermondsey, South East London. And I'm pleased to say that Jean Thurkle, who still serves tons of the stuff at Manze's every day, joins us now. June, really good to see you in your virtual pie and mash shop. I love the attention to detail. And talk to me, why is pie and mash so special?
It's a community thing. It's a family thing. It's part of our heritage. People have been coming here for years and years and years. Their families, their grandparents. We've got up-and-coming newbies, as we call them, that come in and want to try and find out what all this tradition is about. We've got people that have moved out of London, and we offer a chilled delivery service to them nationwide so they can still enjoy very much the pie and mash that's on offer.
OK, talk to me about what's in it and what its origins are, because I understand it's now beef mince, but it used to be eel in the pie.
It was,
and it's now served on the side.
Yeah, because of our proximity to the Thames, eels were in abundance. We could just go and help ourselves. So it would have been eel pie. And then the liquor would have been made from the stock from the eels, and it was reduced down to a liquor. That's where the name comes from. But then licensing laws, etc., came in, became very expensive. Beef was the next option, and it's taken off. And that's what we have now. But we do the stew deals on the side. We do the jelly deals on the side. Yeah, it's a lovely meal.
I mean, you're talking my family's language. My dad, my husband, my father-in-law love a bit of Manze's. Like, they're from East London, south of the river. But for those far and wide that come, you can't just walk into a pie and mash shop and order pie and mash. There's a special lingo that goes with it. So what have you got to ask for if you want the proper feast?
Right. Double. So 2 pies, 2 mash with liquor, or they'll just say pie, mash and eels, or a bowl of jellies. Lots of darlings, lovelies, sweethearts. That's the lingo, definitely, because that's what London's all about. That's what it's about, pie and mash.
Well, look, it's not just people that come from far and wide, newbies, oldies, a lot of celebrities as well. Who's coming through those doors to have your double doubles?
Oh, well, Rio Ferdinand's a regular. He's a Peckham boy. We've had Danny Dyer. Tom Hardy's bottom has sat on one of our seats during a commercial that he filmed there a little while ago.
That's Rob Beckett, not Tom Hardy, just in case. Yeah. Just in case people get confused.
Yeah. Tommy Steele we've had in.
We've got Tom Allen there. We just saw Jamie Lang.
Rag and Bone Man. Everyone's a celebrity that comes into Manze's. Everyone. They're welcome to have their picture taken, enjoy themselves.
Who doesn't order the jelly deals? Who doesn't do it properly? That's Brian Connolly there. He doesn't order the jelly deals.
There's a few that don't order the jelly deals. They like to try them. They like them. They surprise themselves sometimes how much they do enjoy them. I think a lot of tourists try them. Strudels are slightly more popular.
Okay.
They're easier because they're nice and
Well,
warm.
look, June, you're making my stomach rumble, and we're running out of time. I don't know what time you shut. I might see you later. Well, there you go. Hi, Mash. Hopefully, get protected status. June, good to talk to you. Anna Botting's up next with The World. See you tomorrow.